I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and today we're going to dye some tonal yarns where we're going to have different depths of shade of one color on our yarn. But we're going to do this by starting off with some resist dyeing by having our yarn in a twisted skein. Right here I have a skein of Knit Pick Stroll fingering weight yarn. This yarn is 75% superwash merino wool, 25% nylon. And I am twisting it up just like I would store it. And we're going to start by dyeing the yarn in this twisted form to get some of the color more concentrated all over the yarn. But then after a little bit, we're going to remove the yarn from the dye bath, untwist it, and add it back into the same dye bath with the same color. Maybe we'll need to add more dye. We'll see how we're going there. But we'll over dye all of the yarn with the same color. Now, dyeing twisted full 100 gram skeins like this gives a pretty reproducible pattern because the dye can only access the outside of the yarn, and you'll end up with white in the areas that are not exposed, which can give some high contrast as you see in this example, and we've done this a lot of times. But if you are to over dye the entire skein in the same color or a different color, you will reduce the contrast between the colors, because even though there's still a difference, and if you add dye all over, you're adding dye both to the darkest area and the lightest area, it's not gonna feel as stark. It'll be more, well, orange on orange, because that's what we're going for today. Now, to set us up for success a little bit, I am going to add a zip tie carefully onto the yarn here. With the other skeins, I'll put the zip tie on before I twist it. This is going to help us because then when we add the yarn back in, it's going to be something we can hold on to. So I'm going to pop the zip tie on, twist the yarn up, sort of fold it in half. I did not count the number of twists, so there might be differences between the yarns, but this is going to give us a little bit more control over some of the tonal variation because we are deliberately adding some more saturated areas on here before we go ahead and apply our all over color. Which we could just do this and apply all over color and start with dry yarn to get some tonal variation in there. But the color, like repeats and sections, might be bigger. This is going to add some shorter sections as well into the yarn. This one's a little wonky, but we are gonna roll with it. Let's go over to our dye bath. Today I want to reuse a dye bath I have already used for some other projects. This dye bath started with 24 cups of water and 6 tablespoons of white vinegar. And I am wiping down the edge because something that hopefully won't come back to bite us later on, there is a little bit of blue and teal dye left there. But you know, if something does happen, then we can discuss troubleshooting things. Yeah, I got almost all of that gone. We can discuss troubleshooting because sometimes you may just want to use your same dye bath over and over and not wait for more water to heat up. And now I actually need to go put on my Deluxe Rubber respirator mask, safety glasses, and gloves as I bring over our dye. And that's because our dye is a mixture of acid dye with citric acid powder. And I am going to sprinkle this in to our dye bath and go rinse out this container. Here is some of that leftover dye that was in the container. And I'm going to stir this up. And I can go remove my mask now. Have I stirred it up? See, this is when like, oh yeah, there's orange on my tongs. I've stirred this up. I was like, do I still need to stir it? Now, I have probably significantly increased the acid in here. And I don't know how much pigment I just put in our dye bath. We're gonna watch and see, and I may bring over more of the same orange dye. This is Paradise Fibers Orange Acid Dye. We may decide to bring over more when we get to our next overdying stage if all of this soaks up into our yarn super, super fast. But speaking of the yarn, let's go ahead and bring it in You can see how absorbent this yarn is because we are very, very quickly soaking in. And I'm thinking, goodness, let's go ahead and wait 5 minutes. And then conceivably we'll come back and just remove the yarn right then. But we can evaluate and always add more dye later on. Now, you probably will not, if you were doing this at home, you probably won't be starting with dye that's mixed with citric acid. But you also might have some dyes mixed with citric acid that you want to use up and want to reuse for something else. And so then this can come in handy. It's been 5 minutes. Let's remove our yarn. There's still, ooh, you can see some of that resist in there already. There is still a lot of orange in our dye bath. I'm not sure quite how much. And so when we add the yarn back in, we can evaluate that a little bit as well. But one thing that's working against me here is that this is a pigment that I don't know that much about, in that I haven't used it a ton. Ooh, we have some super dark areas, probably because there may have been some powder not super dissolved, but that is fine. But the thing that's working against me is that there are some pigments that are known for backstaining. And so I don't know if this is one of those, because if it were to be one that backstains, if we have a lot of variation in the yarn now, when we put it back in, some of that variation could even out. An example of a color that backstains is like emerald green from Dharma. And so I just don't know if this color does that or not. But I'm gonna set this aside to let it cool enough so that way I can easily unopen the yarn and we can see what that looks like. And we'll go ahead and just sort of let this sit while we wait. Before we untwist the yarn, I want to squeeze out some of the water back into our dye pot. This is just going to make things a little easier to work with. And now I'm going to take one of these skeins and untwist it. And okay, you know what? This color is giving us low contrast already. We soaked in, the color struck slow enough, which is shocking because we had the citric acid in there as well. It struck slow enough that the pastel areas, there is a little bit of white, but they are mostly pale orange already. So this means I'm going to need to redo this video with another color, which may mean I need to revisit blue or do a dye that I know strikes a little bit faster. If there's a pigment that strikes slow and you want more contrast, you could start with your yarn pre-soaked so then it won't suck in the liquid as much as we did here. Or you can, I mean, I guess that's what I would recommend, is that you start wet, but it really does depend on the pigment, because some colors, even if you're soaking in all that liquid, you'll still get a lot more contrast. Now, this is beautiful as it is, and now I'm happy because it doesn't matter if we don't have that much dye left, because at the very least we'll cover up and sort of average out things a little bit more from what we have, but this is still already really pretty. But what we're going to get is, yes, there'll be some long sections that are going to be more even in tone, but we're going to have a lot of smaller sections of color that it'll bring those, like that tonal variation. It won't be as big and it'll be more like random in the size. I mean, let's just go right back to the dye bath. Now, we definitely have an opportunity to get more variation of color as we bring our yarn back into this dye bath, which has definitely reduced in volume over time. And you can see now we're soaking up that last bit of color really quickly. And so I could go ahead and bring in, I mean, I've basically soaked it all up. I could go ahead and bring in more dye, but instead I don't think I'm going to. I think I'm just going to be writing this down as a project I want to redo with other colors, because we did still reduce the contrast. The contrast is reduced from where it was, but and on camera it almost looks like there's breaking. It almost looks like there's like yellow and orange, when really it's more intense and less intense orange. I mean, I think that we've got something so pretty here. Yeah, it's just sometimes, you know, things don't work like I expect because things went, oh, you know, we did reduce the contrast a little bit. Like things went so quickly, or so slowly and came in so much when we had it twisted, and then things soaked up so fast now. And so, well, that's just funny. But anyway, I'm gonna let this sit for 30 minutes to absorb the color, and then we'll come to remove it. At the time I'm filming this, not tomorrow, but in like 2 days, I have a video coming out where I dyed twisted skeins and then speckled into the negative space that remained. And I think the main color I used was Intense Iris. I'm taking off my gloves while I talk. And so that worked pretty well and gave me the contrast I was looking for. I just really anticipated there would have been more contrast after the first layer of the color. But you know what? We're creating a beautiful yarn. I'm using up some dye that I wanted to use up, and so that is a win-win here today. I just might need to pick a color next time that I know just kind of sticks to the outside and doesn't go all the way through. Or start with twisted pre-soaked yarn. That is another option as well. So, it also goes to show that sometimes I might have a really firm idea of what I want to create. And I might have a really firm idea of how to achieve those results. And so had I started here hoping to speckle into the negative space or wanting that high contrast, then I might have been disappointed because that isn't what I ended up with. And so this is where playing with the colors that you have at your disposal, playing around with different techniques can help give you a really good feel for the colors. Because I've used this orange a lot, but not that often. Not often enough to say, okay, I have a sense of this is how much pigment I need to get the color I want, this soaks up so fast, etc. And there are other colors that I have a much better expectation of how they might behave in given situations. And that's something that you get by exploring and playing with colors. And so I do believe this is one that does spread like a little bit at least, but anyway, it doesn't really matter because we're creating something beautiful. And a lot of times that is my end result. But say you wanted it to be higher contrast. This technique would be a little harder to do a sample of on a twisted mini skein just because with a twist resist that does give a different result overall. But sometimes trying out a technique on a smaller amount of yarn can help give you a feel. Or you could see, okay, how quickly does this dye absorb to the yarn if it's not twisted? And that can help give you some sense of how things may go as well. But anyway, I mean, I got the end result of the tonal I wanted, just not how I thought I was gonna get there. So, win-win? All right, I'll see you once the timer goes off. It has been 30 minutes. And I mean, I really like the yarn. Again, we're gonna need to try this again. Oh no, one of my zip ties broke. Ugh. Annoying. Gonna remove these. This tends to be more of a problem after the winter than the summer, but here's what I do. I'm gonna grab the yarn across the middle and then still wrap it around, but I'm gonna try and let it cool, and then I'll put a new zip tie or something on. I try to grab it through as much of the yarn as possible, because if I grab just a little bit, then that might not work as well. Man, I wish the camera did the color balance a little better, because on camera that's looking so yellow, when in person it's more peach. Oranges are hard, man. We do have some super fantastic tonals here with lighter and deeper areas all in one color. Now, if I added more dye, we could reduce the contrast even more. This one I'm leaving as is. We will do this again another time where, gosh, I think I have a plan. Let's chat. See, if I go ahead and tell you the plan, then I'm more likely to make this easy going forward. So, when I measure out, see, the key is I'm going to measure out the dye next time. I'm going to measure out 2 equal parts of dye. the first part, I'll put the yarn in twisted and let most of that soak in. Then I will untwist it. There might be some dye left in there, maybe not. But we'll add the second amount of dye, add the yarn untwisted, and dye everything again. This means that it's not going to be exactly like 50-50, because if I'm using the same amount of dye both times, the amount of dye on the outside is going to be more. It's not going to be like a 0.5% depth of shade versus a 1% depth of shade. There would be more of a difference because the first time you're dyeing the yarn, you're using the same amount of dye, but less of the yarn is getting dyed, if that makes sense. But this is how I'm thinking I would set it up. And I mean, maybe we'll use the blue that I used for Hanukkah. I mean, that's a safe one to do because we know that it works in those conditions. So, gosh, but I'm just excited because I think like having more dye prepared for the second round will help me achieve like what I have in my head. But again, things don't always work the same way. If you do the exact same technique with a different pigment, it might behave differently. And so if you have a recipe and effect that you're going for, you may need to do some troubleshooting in there. And this is especially with some colors that are known spreaders or backstainers. Like if we were doing this with fluorescent fuchsia, for example, and we had high contrast of pink and white, if we added it into a full immersion dye bath, some of that pink would bleed out and go to the other areas. So again, those are things that you just have to think about. But we ended up with pretty yarn, and I don't know, I guess like in my head I thought this would work, and it did, but not because of how I thought it would. So anyway, I'm excited. Let's wash our orange yarn. The first zip tie I picked up was the broken one, and I was like, oh no, I broke another, but that was just the same first one. I haven't tossed yet. All right, we're in some cool water. I'm adding a little bit of some dish soap. But you can see how the differences in the color are way softer than they were, even though they were a bit soft to start with. And so this still gives, I mean, there's still some contrast in here. Ooh, we're getting a little bleeding. But you could take this, and the less contrast you have, then you start to get more depth and dimension. Now we still have some contrast in here, but I think it's monochromatic enough that you could potentially get away with some lace or cables. The busier your yarn is, the more your eye will see the color and the contrast in the color instead of seeing the beautiful stitch pattern that you're working on. Okay, we are good now. So a lot of times when I'm deciding what yarn I want to use for a particular pattern, the busier the pattern, the less busy yarn I want. The simpler the pattern, the more busy, wild, chaotic yarn I'm likely to use. But anyway, I'm going to go ahead and pop this in my spin dryer to remove a lot of the liquid, hang it up to dry, and then, well, we'll look at it dry. Orange is a color I struggle to get to look good on camera. I guess orange, the other colors I struggle with are like reds and purples. I mean, I suppose there's reds and orange, so I don't feel yellow in it, and I feel like on camera I feel a lot of yellow coming through on those light areas. I just tried messing around with the white balance a little bit, and that did not help anything. Trying to make things cooler toned did not make the colors feel more true. Which is a shame, because I would call this color in here to be sort of like a peach color. It's like a peachy orange, very soft, and less yellow than like the brighter orange. But you can very much see where our resists were present. This one has not as much lightness as that one does. But, you know, it's hard to know how much we average things out because we got a lot of color go into the yarn when it was twisted. Speaking of twisting, I'm gonna go twist this up right now as we continue to chat. See, this right here is just reading as yellow to me, and it's definitely not yellow. It's like a peach orange, a pumpkin orange. I feel like if I zoom out really far, then maybe it feels better. which doesn't make sense because I have white balance on. There's no reason why it should be adjusting it more yellow. But anyway, this yarn is, and this project was an example of the reasons why I will typically do a small prototype batch before I scale up a colorway to make sure the colors I picked are doing what I want and I'm getting the results that I wanted in my head. Or sometimes I'll start off a project and want to see what the colors are going to do, and then I lean into that further. So this is absolutely a project that we will be revisiting in the future. I'm going to try again to do the demonstration that I wanted, but the reality is I can't always anticipate what's going to happen. And it's okay if you can't either, because after dyeing hundreds and hundreds of different types of colorways, you might expect that I could know what's going to happen and predict, but there's some amount of trusting the process and seeing what will happen, even for us seasoned professionals. If you're in, this looks so yellow. If I take the white balance as cool as I can make it, that's not true either. It makes the background look blue, but it looks desaturated. Annoying. I don't remember what I was saying because I'm just paying attention to the darn white balance. But I am Rebecca from ChemKnits. I love to dye yarn. And oh, now I remember. The Indie Dyer Business Owner Facebook group is filled with people who share things of, hey, this is something that happened to me. This result is unexpected. Has this ever happened to anyone else? And can you help me troubleshoot it? Because we all have recipes or things that we fall back on. And then when something doesn't turn out the way we anticipated, it's great that there's a community of other dyers who can say, yes, maybe it's too hot, or no, I haven't seen it before, double check your batch. I don't know. It's just helpful to share things with other people. I do have a Facebook group, ChemKnits Lab, that you are more than welcome to come and be a part of. And there are other dyers in there learning and helping each other. And so that is something that is really, really handy. But anyway, please subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new video. I post at least twice a week and we have so much fun. Thank you so much for watching.